Hey, really the only thing that gon' be normal is distribution. Normal folks gon' infuse some. Optimize your lineups and you feed the rest, you mute them. Turning it up, these numbers are loud. Peeping this game from a nimbus is wild. Making it rain. While I embrace all this risk, I'm insane. Talking about that best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next well. Guess I got next still. Best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world.
And welcome into a way too early 2023 Baltimore Ravens Fantasy Football Outlook. I'm Bradley Stalder, and if you like tonight's content, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. I'm here for y'all. It's going to be a lot of fun tonight. I'm going to talk about some Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins, and the future of the Baltimore Ravens. But first, make sure you hit that red subscribe button if you are new. And I'm working on a lot of things behind the scenes. I've got, a player profile handbook that's going to be coming out. It's going to talk primarily about upside, some stats and data that are going to be really helpful and useful for you, but are not found at any other place. They are special to this particular site. So once that becomes available, I will let you know. I'll also have some Best Bell merch that I will be getting out to y'all very soon, so you can purchase that if you want to get in on that. And some big news coming for the Best Bell Fantasy Streets. Appreciate all of you. This community has been fantastic during the fantasy football season, and I'm just so excited to get into talking more about these players, which we're going to be talking about for the next 8-9 months before we kick off with more regular season. And we've had some pretty awesome games. I mean, the Jacksonville Jaguars game against the LA Chargers, what a comeback, right? Down 27 points. And then Trevor Lawrence throwing for 4 touchdowns. You love to see it. And it's good for Jacksonville. Looking forward to seeing their matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs this weekend. Also looking forward to that Bills-Bengals matchup. I have a lot of Bengals, so I think the Bills are a little bit more vulnerable than what we're giving credit for, and that's, Joe Burrow is on fire so far, and I'm here for it. I'm here for it. My dad is also a big Bengals fan, so maybe that's the rose-colored glasses that I'm wearing. Nevertheless, I'm here for y'all, here to talk Baltimore Ravens. So if you have more Baltimore Ravens questions, put them in the chat. Ask away. I'm happy to talk about them. Let's first talk about the elephant in the room, and that is Lamar Jackson. Remember, Lamar Jackson was drafted as the last pick of the first round back in 2018. He's 26 years old now and missed 5 games for the second straight season. Now, if you remember last year, Jackson missed a couple games, not because of injury, but because of the COVID list. And instead, Lamar Jackson now is going into, he's played his final year, 2022. He needs a new contract. He's an unrestricted free agent for 2023. We don't know what's going to be the plan because his 5th year option was already in 2022. The Ravens could franchise tag him, which could be very, very expensive. But it's also a shame because you'd think first round pick quarterback, there would be enough shown from Lamar Jackson that he's going to be a difference maker, for your team, for your squad. And maybe the Ravens just aren't convinced that he's shown enough as a passer. Lamar Jackson is a middle of the road passing quarterback. He was 17th this past year in adjusted yards per attempt, 22nd in yards per attempt, 17th in accuracy rating, right? 23rd in clean pocket completion percentage, 24th in red zone completion percentage, 21st in play action completion percentage, 12th in pressured completion percentage. So he's ranging between like this back end quarterback 1 and high end back end quarterback 2. So he's like an average NFL passer. But what makes him a difference maker, we all know, is that rushing. And in 6 of the 11 games he played this season, where he played the majority of snaps, because we're not counting that 12th game against Denver where he only threw like 4 passes. In the 11 games where he played, the majority of the snaps, 6 of them, he rushed for at least 70 yards. He's a running back one who also throws the ball like an average NFL quarterback. So I think it would be foolish for the Baltimore Ravens to trade him away unless you are getting a king's ransom. I don't see any other way about it. Who else are you going to replace Lamar Jackson with? Who else is on the market? I mean, maybe Aaron Rodgers on the market is a better real life quarterback that could be available. I don't think Derek Carr is a significant upgrade. If the Baltimore Ravens view Derek Carr as a better player, I think that's a mistake. So, yes, he was down a little bit in his completion percentage, down a little bit in yards per attempt this year, but he was still 6th in fantasy points per game, and that's including that 12th game where Lamar only played 4 snaps and only threw 4 pass attempts and finished with 1.3 fantasy points. So Lamar Jackson is in that elite tier of quarterback. He had not just one, but 2 40-point games. Week 2 against Miami, where obvious shootout, against Tua. Tua threw five touchdown passes, 6 touchdown passes, something like that. Lamar also had 3 passing touchdowns and a rushing score in that game, 42.6 fantasy points. But then he followed it up against New England. New England ran for 107 yards, rushing touchdown, threw 4 passing touchdowns against the New England Patriots. So the elite upside can be accessed by Lamar Jackson. And that's why I think it's foolish to draft him outside of that second tier of quarterback. You've got your first tier of quarterbacks. You've got your Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. Those are your top 3 in that specific tier. But then your tier 2, you've got Lawrence and Burrow and Fields and Jackson and Kyler Murray. Now, Murray, I think, drops down into that tier 3 for 2023 just because of that ACL tear. Maybe into tier 4 for Kyler because of the ACL. But Lamar Jackson deserves to be in that second tier, assuming that his knee is stable. He missed the last 5 games, the regular season and the playoffs, because of this knee. And he came out and said, if I were able to get out there, I would go out and I would play. But this is a story worth monitoring. I think a lot rests on the medical clearance of that knee moving forward for Lamar Jackson. If he gets full clearance, great. But it's also, we've seen that the Baltimore Ravens have been conservative with the likes of J.K. Dobbins coming off of a pretty significant knee injury. And same things with Gus Edwards as well. Baltimore Ravens willing to wait out and give some time to get news and positive progress for their players coming off of significant injuries. So that's how I'm viewing Lamar Jackson. I think of him as a tier 2 quarterback. I'm happy getting him, in that spot. But if I'm drafting Jackson, I'm interested in getting putting him with a Tua Tagovailoa, tagging him with a Dak Prescott, putting him with a Russell Wilson, pairing up the quarterbacks. For those who had followed my channel, one of the reasons why it's optimal for you to be attacking that quarterback position pretty aggressively in best ball tournaments is because of the fact that your top quarterbacks score more than your top running backs or your top wide receivers. So you want to be, this is almost counterintuitive from those who have been playing season long and regular season long redraft leagues, because in your quarterbacks, you can stream those. You can pick them off waivers. You cannot pick off waivers in best ball. You're stuck with your players. So get yourself stuck with 2 studs. Consolidate. Don't draft a third one. Just draft 2 stud quarterbacks and move on. Allow yourself to take some shots on other flex plays later on in the draft. And that's one of the reasons why King Capital, who won the $1 million season-long tournament for Underdog this past year in the BBM3, he paired Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow. Hurts just so happened to be the number one quarterback at rate of which he scored top 5 quarterback weeks. Joe Burrow, 5th in that category. So if you can be aiming for elite players at the highest scoring position, then yes, like it can make up for any deficiencies or some of the deficiencies in any of the other positions. That's how you have to view this, is that those elite quarterbacks not only can score more, but can access some forgiveness or some mercy if you miss out. I do like Jackson this year. I wonder if he will stay on the Baltimore Ravens. That's going to be something we're going to be monitoring this offseason. Still quarterback 1 in my book, and one of the highest upsides among all quarterbacks. We're going to move on to J.K. Dobbins. Before I do, I want to just say, if you have questions about particular Baltimore Ravens, you want me to talk about players who I won't be talking about or don't have plans to, like I'm going to talk about Dobbins. I'm going to talk about Edwards and Bateman and Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. If there are other players on the Baltimore Ravens, throw them in the comments, or you want me to chat about one versus another or compare players, throw them in the comments. But I do want to talk about J.K. Dobbins because Dobbins is a stud. Okay. Weeks 3 through 6, he came back from the ACL tear he suffered back in 2021, and he didn't rush more than 13 times in any of those games. But in the game where he did against Buffalo, 52% of the snaps, 13 carries, ran 10 routes in that game, 4 receptions that tied a season high, and then 63 total yards, 2 touchdowns, finishes the running back 10. He still struggled with his knee weeks 5 and 6. And so he took some weeks off, got that extra surgery, rested, recovered, rehabbed, and came back week 14 through 17 on a tear. 3 of the last 4 weeks of the regular season, J.K. Dobbins, 93 or more total yards. And he had a touchdown during that stretch. He finished as running back 10, 19, 40, and 28 during that 4-game span, and never got more than 50% of the snaps. So J.K. Dobbins is a player that I'm keeping my eye out. What are the Baltimore Ravens going to do with their backfield? Because we saw Kenyon Drake get some run and have a couple spike weeks while J.K. Dobbins was out. We saw Gus Edwards have a couple spike weeks and some volume. There were 2 games where Gus Edwards had 16 carries in J.K. Dobbins' absence. But once Dobbins came back from the extra surgery, he had no fewer than 12 carries. And he got a couple targets. He got sprinkling of targets during that span as well. But especially in week, not just week 17, but in week 19, okay, which is actually the playoffs, if you want to think about it that way. J.K. Dobbins, 4 receptions, 5 targets, 105 total yards against the Bengals in that wild card weekend. He had the touchdown, 20.5 PPR fantasy points. That's exactly what we wanted to see. It was his highest scoring game of the season. And yes, there was some criticism about J.K. Dobbins not getting enough carries, but he had 13 carries and 5 targets, 18 opportunities. That was the most opportunities of the entire year. So yeah, he could have carried more, but he already carried the most of the year. He was used the most. So I could see how J.K. Dobbins could be a little upset on only 13, but I do like to see that he had 4 receptions for the second time on the season. And another thing you want to be encouraged by for J.K. Dobbins, his true yards per carry, 5.2. That was 4th among all running backs, 9th in yards per touch, 2nd in juke rate. That's an indicator that a running back is willing to make cuts while he's running, and that he's doing it at that high rate. He's trying to avoid defenders. So that's important as well. He's not taking as many hits. He's trying to avoid defenders. And in fact, J.K. Dobbins, the 3rd highest breakaway run rate in the NFL among all running backs. But he had the 3rd highest breakaway run rate, but he had the 2nd most defenders in the box on average, and he had the highest stacked front carry rate of all running backs. So he was facing a ton of defenders and breaking away from them because of this juke rate. That's Nick Chubb type of running. That's Derrick Henry type of running. Dobbins has the capability and the upside of getting into that like Nick Chubb type of upside. We're talking running back 1, but is he going to get the volume that we want, right? Can he get consistently 15 plus carries? If the answer is yes, then he's a running back 1, even if he doesn't get, those 3, 4, 5 targets a game. If he only gets 2 targets or 1 target a game, he still can be that, especially if Lamar Jackson is still on this Baltimore Ravens offense. So we want to be in on J.K. Dobbins, I think, for 2023. Because let's switch gears and talk about his backfield mate for this season, Gus Edwards, as well. Gus Edwards, entering the last year of his contract, is a player that was splitting carries near the end, but was getting outsnapped and outcarried. It was clear that it was J.K. Dobbins' backfield. I mean, looking at weeks 14, 15, 16, and 17, where he shared the backfield with J.K. Dobbins, 36, 18, 40, and 18% of snaps. That's not going to get it done. Gus Edwards, I'm worried about from a fantasy perspective. I think he's past the age apex. I think he's past his prime. But could he be a useful first and second down grinder on another team? Possibly. Possibly. I mean, could he go the Latavius Murray route? Yes, and be some efficient first and second down grinder. Possibly. But he could just be a 0 on some other offense. Gus Edwards, looking at his contract, is a dead cap of $1.25 million for 2023. His cap hit, though, is 5.6. So the Baltimore Ravens can save about $5 million by cutting Gus Edwards this year. I don't know if the Ravens are going to keep him around given what he was contributing this year. Yes, if 5.0 yards per carry. And looking at the efficiency metrics, 4.7 true yards per carry was 11th best among running backs. So he still has it from an efficiency standpoint. Still 24.1% juke rate is pretty good. I mean, J.K. Dobbins was 43.4% juke rate. So Dobbins still playing significantly ahead of and a better runner than Gus Edwards. But Edwards isn't bad. It's just he doesn't offer anything in the way of receptions, at least in the Baltimore Ravens offense. Could he use a change of scenery? Yeah, he could. And could some offense pick him up as a veteran presence, a grinder, a goal line back who's efficient? Yes, I think so. But Gus Edwards did not catch a single pass in his 9 regular season games for the Baltimore Ravens. Right? He had 2 targets. The only reception he had on the season was during the playoffs against the Bengals. He did not eclipse 100 total yards in any game. He had 2 touchdowns that first game he came back against Cleveland week 7, where we know Cleveland, one of the worst run defenses in the NFL this past year. Still, Gus Edwards, since that game, did not get inside the top 30 of running backs outside of that week 7 game. It was a pretty tough showing for Gus Edwards. So I wonder if a change of scenery is going to be better for him. I expect that Gus Edwards, unless he renegotiates his contract, will end up on a different team in 2023. And even if he stays with the Baltimore Ravens, it's that Gus Edwards will play second fiddle to J.K. Dobbins. Mark Volkman from YouTube. Do you think the Ravens should move on from Greg Roman? Even with Lamar and the Ravens come to a deal, there are other issues from play calling, lack of wide receiver options. I think we need to equip Lamar Jackson first before we move on to what the offensive coordinator is doing. I mean, you're running out there. Mark is pointing out, like, could the play calling be better? Yes, absolutely. But you're also limited with what you have. Like, I'm a big believer that grace builds on nature, Mark. Like that you gotta have a little bit of talent. And when you've got Snoop Huntley throwing to Deshaun Jackson, and Devin Duvernay and James Proche and Sammy Watkins. That's gross. And then Rashad Bateman should be back this year. But if the Ravens don't address that wide receiver 2 position, that's a disservice to Lamar Jackson. You can't just depend on Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews and then say, you know, who's going to be a good third receiving option? That rookie, Isaiah Likely. I mean, Likely played well. Let's give the rookie tight end some credit. But I think that the Ravens aren't going to move on from Greg Roman unless, you know, you have to know as the Ravens that you weren't giving the quarterback receivers to succeed with. I mean, even Mark Andrews, who was dealing with injury for part of the season, did not have some good games. So should they move on from him? That's to be determined. Play calling can be criticized. Whenever you lose, you're going to be pointing fingers. The Ravens made the playoffs though, and I think that they knew that they didn't have the wide receiver core. They need to address that. That needs to be a significant play. Who would be an interesting pickup, and this is a deep shot, but maybe DJ Chark if he's not re-signed by the Detroit Lions. That might be an interesting play. You put Bateman on one side, as more of the refined route runner, and DJ Chark more deep to spread the field. And then you have Mark Andrews hovering, between the hashes. And I think you've got an interesting makeup there. I do think that they either need to address it in free agency or the draft. So, yeah, I don't know if they should move on necessarily from Greg Roman at this point, just because the personnel was just so bad this year. But good question, Mark. Appreciate you chiming in here. Speaking of Rashad Bateman, he's the next player I want to chat about today. And Rashad Bateman played 6 games, weeks 1 through 4, and then weeks 7 and 8. He did not play more than 68% of snaps in any of the games, which is a massive disappointment. In 2021, we didn't see Rashad Bateman eclipsed 75% of snaps until week 15. But from that point on, we saw Rashad Bateman in week 15 get some red zone targets and touchdowns and air yards. And that's really nice. We like to see those types of things, but it didn't consistently translate for Bateman. And then he suffered injuries. Looking at some of the metrics from this year, only an 18% target share, which is not what we wanted to see, but a nearly 26% target rate, among some of the best in the NFL, right? When he's running out there, running routes and getting snaps, he's getting targets. It's a matter of, is the coaching staff going to play Rashad Bateman in a full-time role? He only ran routes on 64% of snaps, and that was down from last year. His route participation last year was 75%. He needs to get closer to that 80% route participation for us to be happy about his role in this offense. It was actually very disappointing. So 2.59 yards per route run is respectable, but to see 5, 7, 4, 6, 5 targets, actually playing 55% of the snaps or so, like, he's gonna get the targets, but it's a matter of, is he going to play a full role? Is he gonna get the snaps? That's the frustrating thing, is we didn't get enough of a sample the second year, but we did get a couple nice spike weeks. We saw 1 week where he was wide receiver 13, week 2 against Miami, that blow up game for Lamar Jackson. And week 1 against the Jets as well, a respectable defense against DJ Reed, who ended up being a shutdown corner. 13.9 fantasy points, 2 for 59 on 108 air yards and 5 targets. So Rashad Bateman is a player that I put a poll for my Twitter. Do you want Rashad Bateman in Dynasty or Amari Cooper? Because they're back to back on Keep Trade Cut right now. And 75% of people said Rashad Bateman. 75%. I don't know. I don't know. I'm torn because I do love Bateman's route running. I do love Bateman's talent profile. Like, first round pick, only 23 years old still. And I love his comp on Player Profiler. His comp is Stephon Diggs, and it took years for Diggs to evolve from this like sporadic spike game talent, like extreme talent, but it would only hit sporadically, to a consistent fantasy producer. It took years of maturing as that route runner to get open and to learn about the NFL, especially because he's only 6'1", 190. So not like a big time alpha. Those players have to learn their way around the field a little bit better. They're not going to be able to bully players like they were more likely to in college. So Rashad Bateman is an interesting player that I think a fine wide receiver 3. He's going to give you some wide receiver 2 weeks. He's going to give you some wide receiver 3 weeks. Fine. But I wonder what his ADP is going to be like come. I wonder what his ADP is going to be like come 2023. I'm pulling up Underdog's way too early ADPs right now so I can talk about that particular question. And if you haven't played on Underdog, use the promo code FFF for 100% first time deposit match up to $100. Okay, let's talk Bateman here. So Bateman's wide receiver 39 in way too early drafts on Underdog. I don't hate that. Outside the top 36 of wide receivers, with being the wide receiver of 1 on his team potential, sure, I'll take some shots on Rashad Bateman. I don't hate that at all. All right, let's talk about Mark Andrews now. Tight end Mark Andrews finished as the tight end 3 in fantasy points per game, 12.7, which is down 5 points per game from last season. He played in 2 fewer games, 500 fewer receiving yards, 4 fewer touchdowns. But looking at his tight end target share, 29% target share, 29% target rate. He was 3rd among all tight ends in targets, 1st in route participation, 1st in tight end air yards, 5th in target quality rating, 4th in red zone targets, 5th in deep targets, 5th in average target distance, 2nd in air yard share among all tight ends, 3rd in tight end receptions, 3rd in receiving yards, 2nd in unrealized air yards. Over 500 unrealized air yards for Mark Andrews. He was getting downfield, and that is clearly the impact of Snoop Huntley on Mark Andrews. He was getting open, but unfortunately was not connecting. And 9 drops also didn't help his production. He was 4th in yards per route run among all tight ends with 2.19. And was given the 3rd most cushion as well. Like, the teams were like, sure, you can run some routes, Mark Andrews. Like, fine. Like, your quarterback isn't going to get you the ball anyways. 4th in best ball points added among tight ends, and 4th in total tight end fantasy points. You know, looking at what he did with Lamar Jackson during Lamar's blow-up games. Remember, Lamar had weeks 2 and 3 where Lamar finished with 40 or more fantasy points. Mark Andrews during that time finished with 25 or more fantasy points in those 2 games as well. Hitting on that stack at the beginning of the season was absolute straight cash. But then we fast forward to that Cleveland game, because in week 6, Mark Andrews suffered an injury. Cleveland game, he played 91% of the snaps, 2 targets, only 0.4 fantasy points because he rushed the ball for 4 yards. But then only played 14% of snaps in week 8. And then even coming back in weeks 11, 12, and following, Mark Andrews was extremely disappointing up until week 17 against Pittsburgh, where he finished 9 for 100 on 9 targets, 65 air yards. But just because the targets were there and just because he was getting a couple receptions, the Ravens were not in scoring position when Lamar Jackson was not on the field. And so the lack of Lamar Jackson moving the ball down the field, and also J.K. Dobbins being gone for a little bit of that as well, severely impacted Mark Andrews and his effectiveness. Plus, Andrews recovering from an injury himself. It was the perfect storm of Andrews to underperform for the second half of the season. So I think Andrews deserves to be in that upper tier. Like, looking at the tight end percentages, Andrews still finished third among all tight ends in rate of achieving top 5 weeks. So it was Kelsey number 1 at almost 60% of the time. Kelsey getting a top 5 tight end week. Kittle was 2 at 33%. And then Mark Andrews was third at 29%. So it was a clear tier difference of Kelsey and then Kittle and Andrews in that very close second tier. And then it's a third tier. Like Dalton Schultz was 15% of the time being a top 5 tight end. But he was 4th. And his rate was half of that of either Mark Andrews or Kittle's. So Mark Andrews still clearly in that high echelon of tight ends. The question is, what is his value going to be in the 2023 drafts? Is Mark Andrews only getting 12.5 fantasy points or more in a third of games for half PPR scoring in a third of games during 2022? Is that making him a 4th round pick? A 3rd round pick? I don't think he's a 2nd round pick. I think that would be too much because of how clearly Travis Kelce is a tier above everyone. Like, Kelsey got 12.5 fantasy points about 70% of the time. Like, it was just gross relative to everyone else. So that's what we're looking at when talking about upside. Like, Andrews can access that. If Lamar is back, we're talking about one of the most elite tight ends in the NFL still. But is he going to be a 3rd round pick? Is he going to be a 4th round pick? I think I'm in on him as a 4th round pick, but you're missing out on a lot of other upside when you're drafting a 4th round pick with a tight end that doesn't produce for you, half of the time or 2/3 of the time, right? That hit rate is still really bad among tight ends. Yeah, hit rates are pretty disastrous when it comes to trying to get a tight end to get you to 12.5 fantasy points. It's a hard thing to do. And then last, Isaiah Likely. We'll talk about Isaiah Likely tonight. He finished as tight end 27 in total fantasy points, tight end 32 in fantasy points per game. He finished with 60 targets, 36 receptions, 373 receiving yards. Not bad for a first year. Not bad at all. He was 18th among all tight ends in target share, 8th in target rate. When Isaiah Likely played snaps and ran routes, Isaiah Likely got past the ball. Nearly 25% of the time, Isaiah Likely got targeted on his routes, which is a wild thing to think about. He was 9th among all tight ends in slot snaps. If we look at Mark Andrews was 2nd in slot snaps. So if there is a handcuffed tight end in the league, it's Isaiah Likely. And we saw Isaiah Likely access some elite ceiling games. He was the tight end 9 in week 9. He was the tight end 2 in week 8. He was the tight end 3 in week 18. And then he had a couple week 17, tight end 17s and 18s and 19s sprinkled throughout the season. But Isaiah Likely is not a bad best ball pickup. Like, if we're talking about, where can I leverage the field? Where can I take late round stabs? Isaiah Likely is being drafted as the tight end 27, which is like an appropriate or fair price. And if you can get a couple games where Isaiah Likely contributes to your fantasy team, like that's phenomenal. Okay, Isaiah Likely finished as a top 13 tight end in rate of which you achieved top 5 tight end weeks. It's phenomenal. He's got upside. He's in an offense that will target the tight end in a massive, massive way. Isaiah Likely is the Taysom Hills of the world, the David Njoku's of the world. Like, he's not that athletic prowess, but if you're viewing it from a best ball lens, you want a player who can spike and who's not costing very much. Tight end 27 is really inexpensive. So consider Isaiah Likely as an upside pick. Like, give me Isaiah Likely over, who are some tight ends that are going ahead of him? Give me Isaiah Likely over Mike Gesicki. Give me Isaiah Likely over Bellinger, over Jelani Woods, over Trey McBride. Give me Isaiah Likely over, where's a spicy one? I don't know if Zach Ertz is going to be back. Like, even if Trey McBride gets the start, like maybe Zach Ertz won't be ready by week 1. Like, give me some Isaiah Likely shares. I don't know if I wouldn't draft him ahead of Zach Ertz, but I would want more shares of Likely than Zach Ertz. It's just how you want to view this type of player, right? Isaiah Likely had some interesting metrics. I talked to you about the target rates and routes run and snaps, but 18th among tight ends in yards per route run, and he's being drafted as the tight end 27. Okay, average cushion was second. So teams were willing to give those slot tight ends that Baltimore runs some space to move. And he's not a superb athlete, but he's an 85% burst score type of tight end. So I like Isaiah Likely as a late round consideration and should be bumped up. And if anything happens to Mark Andrews, we're talking about a tight end 1, which really isn't saying too terribly much, but you're paying outside of tight end 2 prices for Isaiah Likely. Yeah, he's an interesting play. And, if you want to take an even deeper play, Josh Oliver also played well in his limited time, or likely missed. So those are the players that I want to talk about for the Baltimore Ravens. I really appreciate all of you tuning in. If you like this content and you find it helpful, make sure you hit that red subscribe button right there. It really helps the channel. And the channel's grown a lot. We're almost at 700 subscribers, and I really appreciate all the support y'all have shown. It's been a lot of fun doing this for all y'all. So until next time, good luck in the playoff best ball streets, everyone.